Hello. Okay. I'm not a talker, so, and this is possibly too technical, but we'll just see how we go. Okay, so basically, let's see. So I'm going to talk about what is performance to a certain extent here. So, who cares about performance? Anyone? Cool. Right place there. Right. Okay, so there's one of the things when you start talking about performance is people sort of get confused between performance and scale. So performance is how fast can your page load, and how many people, and scale is how many people can I throw on your site. So, so we're talking, what's my next one? Okay. So yeah, so you can speed up your site, and that potentially could actually reduce your level scale, or you could actually make your site slower, but that could actually increase how many people you can throw out. So those things, why people generally lump them together, they're not necessarily the same thing. And if anyone's got any questions, just ask, so I'm quite happy to answer it. Like go off something, or talk about something, or don't go into much depth. Okay. So why performance matters. More people are using websites for their day-to-day tasks, using them as applications. People less and less installing apps on PCs and more using websites straight. Visitors will not tolerate slow sites, they'll just leave. They've got lots of choices. There were some interesting stats done by Google and Amazon. They were saying for every 500 milliseconds slower Google was, they dropped 20% in their traffic. So that's a small difference, just start dropping them. For every 100 milliseconds Amazon was slower, they dropped to 1% in sales. So they've got good reasons to keep their speed fast. So that's why performance actually matters. Some of the benefits of having a fast website is you're perceived to be more trusted, you reduce the bounce rates. Google have said that speed actually is one of their factors in their search engine. It also helps to increase engagement, increase sales. Okay, so one of the things you've got to look at when you go to a website, what is actually going on with the website? Why is it slow? Firebug, and especially the net panel, is your best answer to actually try to understand what's going on. If you open up your site, if you install Firebug, it's an extension for Firefox. Install that. With that, you can then go to the net panel, reload the page fresh. You'll then see how long the page loads in total, which component actually takes the most amount of time, where you're actually spending your time. And if you can see here with this, you'll see the very first line is actually where Joomla is actually downloading and being involved. The rest is all the front end. I think the next one just was there. Yeah. So front end versus back end. So back in the slide. So if you see the first top line, that's, in this particular case, it was taking a bit over a second. That's where Joomla's involved. All your optimization in your back end and in Joomla basically touches there. Everything else, which is your template, what CSS and all that, is all your front end, and it doesn't matter what you do with your web server, that still gets affected by that. So one of the comments is generally, if you look at the timing of a website, about 80% of the time to load that page is actually with front end components. So downloading images, parsing CSS, parsing JavaScript, with that.
Can I just ask a question? That diagram you had.
That one? Yep.
The horizontal bars have colours on them.
Okay, so the colours is part of the, and I'm not sure off the top of my head. So the colours basically represent time in parsing, time to download, DNS resolving. If you get the mouse and actually hover over it, it'll give a breakdown of exactly what all the different colours mean. What was that, sorry?
DNS lookup request, second request, and load.
Yeah, something like that.
Because nothing happens until the green bit.
Yeah, so that's So that's potentially the request out, the DNS. Look up the DNS. So yeah, okay, in a general transaction, you go, so I'm going to www.joomla.org or .com. It goes, I've got to resolve that to an IP address, so it's got to go out to a domain server, get that translation, that comes back, so you've made one request there. It'll then, and that potentially can go multiple chains. Then that'll go to the web server. From the web server, then that'll process the request and then return it. So that's all it does that for the single request. Which also, so DNS also matters in some of this as well with performance, which has absolutely nothing to do with Joomla. Any other questions? Okay. So yeah, so I was saying with the front end versus back end, so the first line is just the Joomla part, the rest is loading the CSS. So in this particular case, they have lots of different CSS files. One of the techniques is actually to combine CSSs, so you actually have less connections, because there's also another factor with browsers is there's a limit of how many concurrent files I'll download from a single domain. So the more requests you have, potentially you're blocking until those are downloading, so that'll slow down your complete speed of the site, or the total time it takes to get the speed. So that's just talking about the front end versus back end. So yeah, so do you focus on...
So when you're combining your CSS, I'm saying for JavaScript, I never know, like some pages have some unique CSS, but it's not used very often, whereas some CSS is used every page. Should I just combine it anyway? Like what would the performance result be?
I can tell you what I do. What I do is I have my template CSS and I'll give CSS for each individual page. So when you that page will have the minimum CSS it needs every time, and they're all combined into one file. The advantage of that is each page has a small CSS to download. The benefit of if you have everything everywhere is you potentially can cache it, so the first time the visitor visits the site, they can cache that one file, and the next time we go to the next page they don't have to re-download it. So it's a bit of what's better, is it a hit on the very first time a visitor visits or a smaller hit on every single page? I personally like the smaller hit on every page because I want the first user's experience to be as best as possible, and might be milliseconds difference, but it's still that small difference still might count. So, does that answer the question well enough?
Doing great.
Okay. How many people know what Nginx is or Apache? How many people want to know about the difference between the two? Cool. Come to Joomla Days. They're going to have a good talk about all of Nginx, but I'm not talking about that now. No, that's one thing I want to dig into and I haven't done enough digging into. Nginx is basically designed better for concurrent users. Apache is your Swiss blade which can handle everything. Nginx is designed to do a lot less things, so it's not as versatile, but it's a lot faster, and where Apache will spawn out a thread or a process per processor. So the person gets it, downloads the page, it'll wait till that's completely finished before they will get the next request. So even if they're downloading an image, that potentially will block it, where Nginx will actually get the request, get it, send it, and then continue processing, so it's not waiting for the whole request. I had a site where I had Keep Alive on. Who knows what Keep Alive is? Okay, not many. There's another setting which is a performance setting called Keep Alive, and what that does is if you make a request to a server, it'll keep that TCP. So when you make a request to a server, you do a TCP connection, which is basically it sends a packet, it gets an acknowledgement, it sends back that it received an ACK, and it sends back. So you do a three-way handshake to validate with the TCP socket. So it'll send the request to the server, get the data, close that socket. So if you don't have Keep Alive, it'll make the request, go to the server, get that file, close it. And every time it does this three-way handshake, if you have Keep Alive on, it'll actually keep that connection open. so it can keep downloading it, so it's actually quicker to download, but then that'll actually keep, so you say keep alive for 5 minutes, so they've got 5 minutes to keep it alive so they can make further requests so their requests are quicker. That'll lock up that Apache thread or fork for 5 minutes. Yep.
Is this a Joomla setting or?
This is an Apache setting. So yeah, I had a site, and one of the problems was it was getting too many users, so it was keeping that thread, those threads filled up, so I was waiting for these threads to finish, and so I was just blocking. And so Keep Alive can make things faster for the individual user to download multiple things, but it can potentially, like I said, this is the performance versus scale. Having Keep Alive can increase performance, but can make scale worse, where you turn it off, scale can be better, but performance can be worse. So that's sometimes the trade-off between performance and scale. Okay, I've just taken a hint. So Yahoo has a list of best performances for performance. There's a link down the bottom. I'll put this slide up on SlideShare when it's done. This is just a direct copy, and 3 pages of just bullet points. So these are the best practices. So minimize HTTP requests, which is what I was talking about with how many connections you have. So the more connections you make, the slower it gets. It's got to do that TCP connection. So you want to reduce that overhead of every connection. Does people know what ping is? Like the ping command? Okay, so every time you do a ping command, you might have like 100 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds. That's how long it takes it to take a packet to transfer it from your computer and get a response. So every time you do a HTTP request, you basically got this extra overhead. So the less requests you have, the less overheads you have. Content delivery network. Getting back to ping, how long does it take for a message to go from here to the US versus if you have the content in Australia? The content network will make your content locally available close to that location, which will speed up that ping time. So if you go back to the processing of that Joomla request, there's maybe half that time is actually just sending the request to the server and getting that data back, and half the time is actually processing. So if you can use content delivery networks, you can actually reduce that speed that way as well. The expiry or content headers is back to the reduce HTTP requests. If the person goes to the site for the first page, they'll download every content. They go to the next page. If you've got common images, that can be set to not expire, so they come back to that, they won't have to re-download those images for every single page they go to. GZIP components, again, performance versus scale. The GZIP basically is, so does everyone know what GZIP is? Okay, do you know what a zipping a file is? Okay, so you've got a 100K text file, you zip it, it's 10K. That's basically what gzip does. It basically zips the HTML and sends it across the wire compressed. So instead of sending 100K over the wire, it's sending 10K. So it's quicker to transfer. So that makes performance better, scalable, worse potentially, because you're actually doing compression on the front end and the back end either way. So it can, depending on what your issue is with your server, is that you need more performance or more scale. If the issue is scaling, so you might find turning, and Joomla does have in the control panel the ability to turn on and off gzip the output. So that is actually a Joomla setting. Put style sheets at the top. That just is look and feel. Unless people are template developers, doesn't really matter too much. Put scripts at the bottom. Not so easy to do with Joomla. Possible, but not so easily. The point of that is when the browser is actually parsing a JS file, a JavaScript file, it can't actually render anything on the display because that file itself might have a document write inside of it. And if it has a document write, that needs to be written in that place. So it'll actually block any more processing of that HTML page until that JavaScript file has being processed. So if you can put it down the bottom, it means you can actually show the page and it's in essence being delayed in loading that content, but the user won't actually, it'll perceive to be quicker. In essence, it won't be any quicker, but it'll perceive to be quicker, and that's what actually counts as the perception. Again, void excessive expressions, that's just slows down the parsing and displaying of the page. Make JavaScript and Css external. If you open up the source of a page, if you see these huge gabs of JavaScript at the beginning, that's because it's all inside the HTML page. And it's good because it reduces HTTP requests. It's bad because then Spiders and Google has to parse all the HTML, all the JavaScript before it even gets to your code or what your page is about. It also means that every time you go to that page, it has to be re-downloadable, where an external file is cacheable. So when I say cacheable, does people know what I mean by cacheable? Reduce DNS lookups. Most people probably are only using the one domain on their site. Is anyone using Does anyone here use multiple domains when they download a page? Petey's? A couple of people? Not really? Yeah, so it's a catch-22. Sometimes some of these other ones will actually say it's good to do like images on a cookieless domain. And so you might have more, and the other thing is you can have more you can, like I said, the browsers are limited. I think generally it's like about 8 concurrent downloads per domain, so you can actually get more concurrent downloads if you use multiple domains. But like I said, each domain requires a lookup, which adds extra time, so it's a balancing act. Has anyone got any other questions while I keep going on, or keep doing this? Minified JavaScript and CSS, which we talked about briefly before, which is basically what that is you combine all your JS and CSS files together. Oh, that's actually just minify. One of the common practices is you combine the files and you minify, which basically means you take out all the white space. So that means because there's no benefit of having the white space, it just takes up extra space and extra stuff across the wire. Avoid redirects. If anyone knows what redirects are? Yeah, not really. So basically, so redirects is 301 requests, which you probably don't have to deal with too much. Remove duplicate scripts. Flush the buffers early, really hard to do in Joomla. People probably aren't really using Ajax. So post-load and preload components is basically going, this is more about a perception issue, can you load something afterwards? So potentially if you've got something slow, so maybe you've got Facebook there or Twitter or something like that, can you load those in an iframe or load up a content later, or set up a JavaScript to load it post? So you can load up the main content and the content can be loaded, but the slower part can be loaded afterwards, so the user feels like the site's fast. A lot of this is about perception, so it's not, a lot of this is you might find the total time at the end is actually the same, but if you can make the perception as faster, then users will be happy. There was a measurement that people were trying to do, which was above how long did it take to load above the fold, opposed to load the whole page, and some of this measurement stuff is quite hard to do because there's no exact real answer. Minimize the number of iframes, no 404s. Avoid 404s is a good thing to do. Have a look go back to the net panel and you should see any 404 come up in red. Basically that means you've got a request for a file or something there which is no longer on the server, so either the file name's wrong or it's been deleted or something like that. If there's a 404, it can't be cached. Every time you go to that page it's going to be re-requested. So that's just going to keep adding extra overhead. So avoid those wherever possible.
What about if using a redirect component?
What's that?
What if using a redirect component to capture those 404s?
Yeah, that will catch. Okay, so Joomla has, Tim was asking about the redirect component and that. The redirect component will capture a list of whenever there's something not missing, the redirect component will put that into a list, and you can actually specify a location to translate that to. If you can actually translate it, great, but if it's still showing up in that list, you probably want to go clean out that list and avoid it where possible. If you've got a redirect because of that, then that's fine to go to. That's more complete pages. Does that actually answer your question? Or? Reduce cookie size, use cookie-free domains for components, which is, people probably don't care about cookies too much, but do people even know what cookies are? Cool. So one of the things is you will get a session, when you go to Joomla, you'll get a session cookie. If you've got Google Analytics, you'll get 4 more cookies. Other components will drop cookies. If you've got tabs, they'll drop cookies. So one of the other ideas is actually to set up your images to go to a cookieless domain. So all your images will show up without submitting cookies, because that just adds extra. Because every single time you do a request, it'll add all your cookies data into that request, so that just keeps adding more and more data, which transfers across the line. Like I said, I've just copied the list. Optimize images. This one I'll go over. How many people optimize their images? How many people know what that actually means? Cool. So one of the things is I'll go to a different site and I'll look at it and then look up in the net panel. Another thing net panel is good for is looking at file size, and I'll go, the background image that I barely see is half a meg. It's like, okay, so I've got to download half a meg to my machine to see an image I don't see that much of. You've got different file formats. Does anyone know about like PNGs versus JPEGs and things like that? Sort of. If you can get away with doing PNG 8, then it loses quality, but it'll be the smallest file size. JPEGs will lose quality as well, but they'll be slightly bigger. Actually, PNG 8, you'll only lose quality if the picture has more than 256 different colours inside of it. If it's less than 256 colours, it'll be your smallest file size and you won't lose quality then. So if you can, save your images as PNG 8. Do people know what the difference between 8 and 24 is? Or 32?
You don't have the alpha channel?
Right, 24 and 32 is alpha. 8 basically uses a palette to pick from, and 24 has the complete RGB selection inside of it.
8 doesn't have transparency.
No, 8 won't have I don't think it has transparency either.
I just did a little testing here with the redirect in Joomla.
Yep.
And I removed the image from the page.
Yep.
And tried to load it. And it doesn't appear, so the redirect actually goes to pages. So if you have an HTML for a flyer, you have the listing there, you can redirect to something else and things there. However, if you have an image listing, like you said before, it does not appear in the redirect, but you can see on the file button, like you said, and then you have to resolve the problem, because that image is not cached, off you go. So redirect works with pages, and not internal images inside a page you're loading.
So did everyone hear what it is? So basically we're saying the redirect component that Tim was talking about works for pages, it doesn't work for images, so it'll only help you if you're redirecting pages. If you have an image missing, that won't show up in the list and you'll still get 4 calls. Another one here is don't scale images in HTML. Do people know why you don't scale images in HTML? Cool, Dex knows.
You don't want a responsive design.
Yeah, there is that. But mostly, if you're going to show the picture as 300 by 200, you don't want to be sending a 600 by 600 by 300 image down, because you're basically going instead of sending a 20K image, you might be sending a 50K image to have the larger size. You're better off resizing it on the server and sending it down as a smaller image. One of the things which would be interesting to look at is one of the other side effects is if you specify how many people just include an image and don't specify the size of the image in the HTML. That's okay, do it. I was saying is, one of the things which is interesting is the page will render without the image there because then it's got to download it. It will force the browser then to do a thing called a reflow because once it's got the image, it will actually get the correct size of that element and force it to recalculate all the images and the location. So you can save some time by actually, sometimes you'll see the page readjusting, so you can actually get rid of that jarring effect and have it sit perfectly if you actually specify in the HTML the actual image size. Even though the image size is the exact same when you're downloading, you're not actually resizing it, just to stop that reflow effect happening.
You need to do both dimensions.
Yes. Well, if it will fit into the original size, so if you have a div which has already been specified bigger than the image, it won't cause that reflow effect. It's only when it actually has to resize the page because that element is either smaller or not the same size as what it expected. One of the other ones there which I thought was interesting, it says keep components under 25k, which is in essence the HTML pages or JavaScript or that. And this was talking as an optimization for the iPhone, was because it was saying that the iPhone will actually not cache anything that's over 25k. So we want to keep that small for caching if anyone cares about actually doing things on mobile devices. So that's about it. Any questions? Right, for questions? What was that, sorry?
You should mention the ISO and HTML.
What was it?
YSlow.
Yeah, so YSlow is another extension to Firebug, and it'll basically grade your site, and it'll actually follow these rules which I was saying here. Will actually give you grading based off these rules and show you where areas where it basically will break up all these rules here, YSlow, and then it'll say this is where you're good, this is where you're bad, this is where it can be improved, and we'll focus on that. It also, thanks? Debug of Joomla. Debug of Joomla will generally show you what SQL, so this is back to the front end optimization versus back end optimization. One of the things with Joomla is the more plugins you install, the more components you install, the potentially slower the Joomla is, which is why it's good to look at the net panel to go, is it actually Joomla that's taking a long time, or is it actually downloading all the components and it's because I have the site itself is 1 megabyte, or is it that Joomla actually is flying along and it's actually something, and it's actually all the extra components that are taking a long time. Some components and plugins are slower, so you can just, by disabling, if it's actually the Joomla page that takes a long time to load, you can try disabling plugins and components. The debug output, the Dex was saying, will show you languages which aren't found, it will show you all the SQL statements you can find. One of the things I didn't go over here was just internal caching of Joomla, which again is scale versus performance. That will basically go, instead of me reprocessing some things, I can read that straight out of the file. There's complete page caching, which is available inside Joomla. This will allow you to have in dramatically less time the page. Works well if the people are just browsing the site and not interacting. Otherwise you can actually cache at the individual component level. So if you have something which has lots of database queries, you can potentially cache those into the cache, so it only does it on the first one time or once every hour or 2 hours.
Unless you've got people who are logged in.
There's
no caching.
The page caching shouldn't be, but the individual caching should still work even if they're logged in.
Browser caching will work, the duplication one.
I thought that duplication took as one of the parameters that it should still work. Parts of it should still work even if users are logged in.
I would say on the Joomla web forms, I asked a question, they said yes.
I could be wrong. I knew I did before, and maybe I need to play with it a bit more. I know if I'm logged in and I claim my cache, it still generates cache outputs, and I believe parts of it still using the cache. I could probably have a look and play and double check that. I can probably just go, let's write something which caches the database queries and then just try logging and see. But as I know, up to 1.5 and 1.0 and all that will work when you're logged in, so it's surprising that's not at the moment.
You know that site I've been having the trouble
Yeah.
with? I've just done about 3 months work on this one, some of our sites. Nothing really has come through. A couple of things that really did help is Joomla still including version 4, which is gigantic.
With that site, is it actually what is it when users are logged in is the issue, or any visitors, or?
It's variable, but it's both logged in and not logged in. So that was one of my big problems. Another one was social media. I think you need to be really, really careful what you use to include the social media in the site to make sure it's asynchronous. Because a lot of that was probably when my page notes really bad. And the other thing was the model. The article is one, which I'm now throwing out. The articles model, if you're using ACL in Joomla 2.1, it's built the most incredibly large number of SQL queries. And in my case, I didn't need, I managed to replace about 70 SQL queries with one. And that brought the page load time down and everything else trying to set it up. So I basically got all my blogs and articles coming out of module themselves.
So was that a module that was actually causing that issue? Or was that?
It doesn't matter. I mean, it's a blog. As soon as you start either displaying an article where you've got a lot of ACL started, or when you display a blog particularly with a lot of ACL. I had to pay for 2 blogs on it and some modules. So I was trying to put a broad base of content on the screen and just died. 2 blogs, struggling 2 blogs in it. So I use modules because you can't put 2 blog components, can you? So I put 2 blog components. That's killed it. And now I've built 6 modules on the same screen. I'm just running in a few seconds. 6 items. 3 blogs and 3 others.
So yeah, so one of the questions with that particular site is like, is it the database is taking a long time, and or is it actually the processing of the content? And presumably from what you're saying, it sounds like it's the database queries.
Well, I spent a lot of time minimizing all the peripheral stuff that was under my control, doing everything off that list.
Yeah.
Minimizing, deleting, function, everything like that, take the hands on. Also getting rid of the enormous list of JavaScripts that they include, and you start running extensions on. Everyone brings its own little packet of JavaScript and CSS, which is really damaging. But once I've done all of that, the time was the SQL query was missing.
So, question there. If you, with all the, I was going to ask, with all the extensions in your own CSS and the idea of combining, does that mean that you go through a packet, you combine the CSS? That's what the normal with your own CSS.
And there's also components that
It's
will.
fairly technical. It's not hacking involved, but it's going to hack all, everybody will hack everything out of the extensions. And you've got to join up the Minified, and the JavaScript is very resistant to being joined in Minified. Usually breaks. There's quite a lot of R&D.
Then the module gets operated.
You've got to go through it.
That's right.
There is components on the JET that allow you to where it will actually parse after the page is rendered, but before it's actually sent to the browser, it will actually parse it and actually go through and combine all the CSS and JS for you, so you don't need to.
And I tried a number of those, none of which actually worked.
I've
been through quite a lot of them. But there's also some polite extensions that now ask you if you want to load JavaScript or not. Do you want to load jQuery when you do it? Do you want to load extras? Which happens. Hopefully it won't.
I did write a component which did do the majority on Index.2 on the earlier versions. I'm going to try to give you a later version if you dare try it. And I actually spent about 3 weeks rewriting the notification from scratch. So I've actually rewritten all the notification for the JS and the HTML from scratch. So I haven't played with server, so I haven't really done much with it because I've got to fix up all the server side of things. So I'll give you.
As well, in Joomla 3, it should be a bit easier with the tools you can get access.
Is it? That's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Get the choice.
What are you going to say?
I'm going to throw a different question.
Yeah.
A basic one. Joomla comes with a lot of plugins and a lot of stuff built into it. Does it make sense to actually gaining the time by turning some of those off? I'll give you a simple example. Most people install JCE editor to be used by all users of the website. Sometimes it's only demonstrated. So, do you gain any time by turning off tinyDT?
To load JCE is actually quite expensive because there's lots of images and things like that to actually download. If you've got it just installed but it's not on you, then one of the things that I personally do is I actually like to strip out, not just disable, but actually uninstall any component or plugin I don't use, because that'll actually reduce the number of rows in the tables, and the amount of rows in the tables, while it might not make much difference, it does still make a slight difference. So I actually will uninstall it, which is actually not really updates, so I can come back.
Only turning them off doesn't make much difference. You actually have to install it from base.
It's still, okay, so you've got multiple points here. Say plugins, if you've got disabled, they're uninstalled and not on the table. If they're disabled, then there's a little bit of extra time in the query, probably not enough to make a difference. If they're enabled, then that file is actually loaded, so you're getting an extra hit to the disk. Plus, it's got to parse the file. Even if it's not doing anything, it's still going to load that file and actually go through it. If you've got the more module positions you've got on a template, the more queries that also has to do. Because every single time you go to module position, it's got to query the database to say, is there any modules for this? Irrespective if there's modules or not. So, actually having some templates I looked at, and it was like, oh, we've got 40 different module positions on the template. And I was like, so what does that do for performance? It's like, okay, might be flexible, but this is again scale versus performance. What makes it more flexible versus what's more performance?
So now is the next question. If it makes sense to switch some of those plugins off, do you have a list, or is there a list of most superfluous or unusable plugins that most of the times get turned off?
I strip things back to the bare bones, but I don't actually have a list.
Yeah, but how far do you go?
Well, I'll tell you this: if you uninstall com contact, it will break com content because it actually uses in the module. So I'll do that. Actually, I'd actually love to be able to remove com content and basically remove lots of things. I'll actually go into the database. There's certain components you can't remove because I said core. I'll go to the database, set it to non-core, and actually uninstall those too.
Try to scroll over servers. Because that's a cut down version of
Actually, I'd like to see and do some more stuff with being able to uninstall that. Hopefully in the future they will. Any more questions or? Yeah.
Given that you do all that, why do you bother with Joomla?
I could I could write a CMS from scratch. I've actually written CMSs from scratch. But the point is, any work I do, I've actually then got the option of potentially selling it down the point or a shareable. The thing which I like with Joomla is the base framework that I can use, and I don't necessarily have to rewrite everything all the time, unless it's, even if I did write it from scratch, I'd end up writing my own CMS in essence, because I want a basic framework where I can plug and play components or plugins or do bits and pieces, so I use it as a base framework in essence. Does that answer the question, Mona?
Yeah. I don't know if it was a silly question or not. I'm seeing doing all this work. How Joomla was sold to me is complete, nobody public. You didn't have to do all of this stuff.
Well, I'm a developer, I like this stuff.
You can't help yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, the CMS goes at a certain speed, and maybe there's better options for loading pages faster. But like with Dex's issue with how many, so what we should be looking at is reducing the number of modules on a page and things like that. I think with the plugins, like every plugin has to run, it's a native for every page. So I think that's true.
Every system plugin will have to load. There's different types of plugins. So you've got system, you've got content, you've got data, you've got content, system, and editors, and there's a few more there. System will load for all. Something like content will load only when there's content. There's users which will load only certain things. So probably the majority will get loaded, but it's not guaranteed that everyone will load for the page. So from a user's point of view, there's turning on caching, which will help performance. There's reducing modules, plugins that you're loading. There's being potentially trying different components, because some components on the JUG might be written absolutely fantastic, some might be written quite poorly and behave in interesting ways. There might be some components that include social media that's written really poorly and just take a long time to work. So it's playing with just looking at how is a page loading certain components versus other components. If something does load slowly, complain to developers and get them to fix it. That's the point. Get the developers to actually fix it. You're just meant to be consuming this stuff. It's looking at your template, what type of images you're loading, what module positions are, have you got page turned on. Any other questions?
And almost nothing about Joomla. How about database documentation? Is it possible to go see some queries, optimize them, or like develop
One other optimization I do with the database change is there's different table types in MySQL. There's InnoDB, there's memory, and I can't remember, MyISM. Each one has its own benefits and negatives. The database 1.5 was on MyISM. It is changed to InnoDB from 2.5 or the 1.6 branch onwards. The MyISM, when you do a write, will lock the whole table. InnoDB will lock single rows, so that allows you to do writing and reading concurrently. One of the changes I make is I'll actually flip the session table to be a memory table, which means it's kept in memory, it's not actually written to the disk, because that's a heavily modified table, and that'll actually speed up things as well.
So the session table for the user? Or is it...
Okay, so the session table, so what happens when a user comes to a site is they'll create a session, and that's meant for that user to go, every page I work with, I'm saying I'm the same user, so it'll create a session in the session table, and then drop a cookie to say I belong to that session. So the next time they come to the next page, I'll send that cookie and say that's my session, so you know what session is. So every time a user comes to a site, it will insert a row. Every time a user visits that site, that table has to be read. every time that table is then purged regularly, so that table is modified, read and write hugely. So that's one of the optimizations. I'll actually change that to a memory table. And I should try and see if I can create a query for how to change it to that. There is, one of the things to look at is how much time you're spending in the database versus actually Joomla processing. There is actually lots of settings in MySQL as well to say how much memory do you use for query caches. There's different query caches for that. I haven't done enough. Potentially you can do explain on queries to see why that query takes a long time. Do you have indexes on the tables? Most of that should be fairly well optimized already. So there's probably nothing you really need to do. It's more, there is potential settings though in the MySQL, but there you probably shouldn't need to do anything. Yes?
Have you noticed any change in the last year or so, as in the efficiency of Joomla? So from 1.5 to 1.6 to 2.5 and recent versions?
Wow, I went from Joomla 1 to Joomla 1.6, so I didn't really pay much for 1.5.
That's your gut feeling and stuff there.
Yes, yeah. Look at the ACL.
The ACL was one of the features that really needs. It's really good, but the problem is the more records you have, the slower, definitely the slower it gets. So yeah, I haven't looked at enough revenues from content. If you could potentially do group articles by the category, I don't know if you can you group articles by the category? You can do it by category. You should post individual articles.
Yeah, the problem is, because it's got ACL in the menu now, it's checking all that out, and it's checking out the category tree, the article tree, modules. It's actually, if you have a lot of ACL set up, it's just in one that's going to work to check all of that every time you want to display one. It walks down the tree every time for every node. Ends up doing the same if you have a lot of data and you've got comments, it's going to some comments. Unfortunately, I do that. Actually, what I did is, one of the sensational things for me, because I've got a lot of levels of access, membership levels, is by putting my content in the module, you can just put one permission on the module and say, job done. I can write one query, because I know that the module has got access permissions on it. You don't need to check anything on it. So when I rewrote the article model, I wrote it without ACL. Didn't even I've gone down from 7.5 seconds to 0.2 seconds. Just on the Joomla first that's really.
So is that side all getting sorted now for you? So you've got more things you want to do with it?
I'm still working.
Yeah, I'm looking at my latest speed up, which actually should work a lot better.
Sure.
Yeah, so I actually rewrote. Except I know I ended up rewriting my identification for the JS and HTML. There's only, that still needs a bit more work. One of the interesting things you can do with unifying JS, which I still got to do, is where you can actually replace all the variable names. So it's like long names, you can strengthen the short names as well. What's that?
Yeah. Of course, Java application was like you can't use it.
What's that?
You can't use it.
You minify it and you choose it, but
It's just that's yeah, I mean, I always thought that you're talking about white space removal and stuff. JavaScript didn't embrace that too well.
it does, but it still doesn't look greatly. Yes. If you think of a G, I can't remember the exact internal I have written on GZ, but if you think of it, if you've got a white space character, say you've got 10 white space characters, that might be able to reduce it down to 1 to 2 characters, because you still have something to say, hey, this is null cut to that. So if you've got 10 groups of 10 white spaces, that's 100 characters. If you strip it out at 0, if you use gzip it, that would still be 10 to 20 characters. So gzip would still give an 80 to 90% decrease. White space streaming will be 100% decrease for that bit.
I mean, I guess if you got a tool, I'm just thinking of using
Yes. So if you have problems white stripping, you can gzip as well. Yeah.
Just sort of something else that brings the time down. Speaking about including social media, and some of the extensions that do that are very efficient, and others are very inefficient, very still. No one's Google Fonts. How come do they in the templates that you get now use of Google Fonts? They're super sweet. Go to Font Square and download a font or something like that. Deploy yourself.
Just adding that, how we do that, when we use Google Fonts, I always go to Font Square and create, download the font, and then you can bring that font with CSS. You still load the font if it's an unusual font you want to use. However, in Font Square, you can actually select the characters you want to add, so make sure that file is super as small as you can. So you can have you can optimize the font you're choosing as well. Like non-loading characters you know you're not going to use.
Another technique. So that's talking about you can include external fonts there. One other thing which is interesting is where you can actually include images as a basic for the inside your CSS file, so you don't actually have to you just download the CSS file. You don't actually have to even download the extra images, which can also reduce your requests. There was also another comment in there which is about sprites, where you actually combine multiple images into one file, and then use CSS positioning to show which image you actually want. That allows you to actually reduce the number of file downloads as well.
Does Joomla have any support for that, or is that just something you hack together yourself?
The sprite stuff, or yeah, you have to basically, that's all template driven, so you've got to manually do that yourself. Yes.
The other thing we didn't mention, of course, is mobile.
That's not the mobile, but yeah, mobile you want to definitely.
Even in the context of images, where you wouldn't like the same set of images on mobile.
Yeah. Mobile you definitely got to be very conscious of, because they might be going with a 3G bandwidth, which is less space, slower processing, slower speed, so you definitely want to be paying attention to speed if you want to do anything else.
So, sorry, so really with Joomla 3.0, when it becomes everything that's more responsive design, right, you will not be able to save so much storage in regards to mobile.
I haven't played with it enough. It's used the Bootstrap framework, so I hope it will be dramatically better than the virtual stuff, and it should be fairly lost.
Technically, you're still loading everything you would be loading if you are running the site on a desktop.
Yes.
So actually it's more than $10 because some projects are paid at flash.
Is that base this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it search local? Is it search local guy or?